At the airport she said, "Don't walk with me, you'll embarrass me in front of my friends." I nodded. What I didn't know was that this moment outside a Manhattan gallery would become the breaking point that changed everything between us. Looking back, I should have seen it coming, but when you're 8 months deep in what you think is love, clarity isn't your strongest asset. I'd been dating Chloe for those 8 months, and from the outside, we probably looked like a solid couple. I'm a freelance photographer, 31, making decent money shooting corporate events and the occasional wedding. She was 26, an aspiring art dealer with big dreams about breaking into Manhattan's gallery scene. What started as me supporting her ambitions had gradually morphed into me funding her entire lifestyle while she contributed exactly nothing to our shared expenses. That October evening outside the Whitmore Gallery on the Upper East Side, everything crystallized into painful focus. Chloe had spent the entire week preparing for this opening, buying a new dress with my credit card, getting her hair styled at a salon that charged more than most people's monthly car payments, and networking with what she called serious collectors through events I'd been bankrolling for months. I'd driven her into the city, found parking, and was walking toward the gallery entrance when she stopped me cold. "Actually, Jake, you should probably wait out here." Her voice carried that carefully modulated tone she used when she was about to say something that would sting. I looked down at my outfit, dark jeans, a button-down shirt, and a blazer. Nothing fancy, but perfectly appropriate for an art opening. "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" "It's not about the clothes," she said, though her eyes suggested otherwise. "It's just that Victoria and Serena are going to be here, and they're bringing some really important people. Gallery owners, collectors, people who could actually help my career." The implication hung in the air like smoke. I wasn't important people. I was just the guy who paid for her to mingle with important people. "So you want me to wait outside like your driver? Don't be dramatic. You could get coffee somewhere and come back in an hour. This is really important for my future, Jake." Her future. Not our future. I noticed Victoria and Serena approaching, 2 women in their late 20s who dressed like they were auditioning for a reality show about wealthy Manhattan socialites. They worked at smaller galleries and had somehow convinced Chloe that they were her ticket to the big leagues. "Chloe, darling." Victoria air-kissed her while shooting me a look that suggested I was blocking her view of something more interesting. "Is this your photographer friend?" "Friend. Not boyfriend. Not partner. Friend." "This is Jake," Chloe said, her voice strangely flat. "He was just leaving." Serena smirked, the kind of expression that suggested she was witnessing some private joke I wasn't in on. "How convenient. We were just telling the Harriman about your instincts for discovering emerging talent." Such a sophisticated eye. They were talking about Chloe like I wasn't standing right there, which was probably the point. I realized this wasn't just about my clothes or my presence being somehow inappropriate. This was about Chloe being embarrassed by me, period. The guy who funded her art acquisitions, paid for her gallery memberships, covered her networking dinners, but apparently wasn't worthy of being seen with her when it actually mattered. "You know what? You're absolutely right." I pulled out my phone and called an Uber. "I should get going." "Thank you for understanding," Chloe said, relief obvious in her voice. She kissed my cheek quickly, like she was dismissing hired help. "I'll text you when I'm done." As I watched her disappear into the gallery with Victoria and Serena, their laughter echoing in the crisp autumn air, I did some quick mental math. In 8 months, I'd spent roughly $18,000 supporting Chloe's art world aspirations. Gallery membership fees, networking event tickets, the art pieces she insisted were investments, but stored in a unit I rented, the expensive dinners with potential contacts, the clothes for opening nights, the taxi rides to and from every cultural event in the city. $18,000 to fund someone who was embarrassed to be seen with me. The Uber arrived and I gave the driver our Brooklyn address, staring out the window as Manhattan's lights blurred past. For the first time in months, I was thinking clearly about what I'd actually gotten in return for my investment in Chloe's dreams. She'd never paid rent, never bought groceries, never covered a single dinner check, never even offered to split an Uber fare. But more than the money, she'd never once invited me into her world. I was the silent investor, the guy behind the scenes who made everything possible but could never actually be part of the show. 20 minutes into the ride, my phone buzzed with a text from Chloe. Meeting went amazing. Victoria introduced me to someone who might want to represent me. Staying for drinks. Don't wait up. 2 hearts. No thank you for the ride. No acknowledgement of what had just happened. Just excitement about opportunities that my money had helped create but that I'd never be welcome to share. That night, lying alone in our bed while she celebrated her networking success at some expensive cocktail bar, I made a decision that would change both our lives forever. The subway ride back to Brooklyn gave me exactly 43 minutes to plan the systematic dismantling of our financial entanglement, and I used every one of them. I'm methodical by nature. It's what makes me good at photography, being able to see all the elements in a frame and understand how they work together. Now I was applying that same precision to understanding exactly how Chloe had woven herself into my financial life and figuring out how to untangle it surgically. First stop was my phone's banking app, where I immediately froze the joint credit card I'd added her to 6 months ago. The one she used exclusively for her art world expenses while I paid the monthly statements. Scrolling through the recent charges was like reading a diary of someone else's ambitions funded by my bank account. $347 at a Soho boutique for networking attire, $89 for a dinner with a gallery assistant who might have connections, $156 for art books she claimed were research, $78 for a subscription to some insider art newsletter. The card had a $15,000 limit and she'd used $11,400 of it in the past 3 months alone. By the time I reached our Prospect Heights station, the card was frozen and Chloe's primary source of spontaneous spending had been cut off. But the credit card was just the beginning. The next morning, I took a sick day from a corporate shoot I'd been dreading anyway and drove to the storage facility in Queens where we'd been keeping Chloe's growing collection of investment art pieces. The unit was in my name, paid for by my automatic monthly payment, and filled with canvases, sculptures, and prints that Chloe insisted would appreciate in value. I'd never bothered to actually inventory what was in there, trusting her expertise about art markets and potential returns. Walking through that 10 by 12 space was like touring a museum of my own financial naivety. There were pieces from at least a dozen different artists, all purchased through galleries or art fairs, all funded by money I'd earned shooting other people's corporate headshots and wedding ceremonies. The paperwork was meticulously organized in a filing cabinet Chloe had insisted was necessary for tracking provenance and value. What I found when I opened those files made my stomach drop. Every single purchase receipt showed her as the buyer, with payment coming from our joint account or my credit cards, but the documentation listed her as the sole owner. Legally, I'd been funding someone else's art collection while having no claim to any of it. But there was something else in those files that made everything worse: resale receipts. Chloe had been quietly selling pieces from the collection, always smaller items I wouldn't notice were missing, and keeping the profits in a separate account I knew nothing about. She'd turned my financial support into her private art flipping business without telling me she was selling anything at all. 3 pieces I'd paid for, totaling $4,200, had been sold for $6,800, and I'd never seen a penny of the profit or even been told about the sales. I spent the next hour transferring the lease entirely to her name and calculating the total cost of my involuntary investment in her entrepreneurial career. The storage unit was $180 monthly for 14 months, plus the art pieces, insurance, and transportation costs when she'd needed to move things for her pop-up exhibitions. But the biggest shock was still coming. Back home, I logged into my business credit account to review charges from the past few months and discovered something that made my hands shake with anger. Chloe had been using my business credit line to fund a pop-up gallery space in Williamsburg without my knowledge or permission. The charges were carefully disguised as equipment rentals and venue deposits, but when I called the numbers on the receipts, I learned she'd signed a 6-month lease for a small gallery space and been paying rent, utilities, and insurance using my business credit. She'd basically started her own gallery using my money and my credit history while hiding the entire venture from me. The total exposure was $23,000 and climbing, with automatic payments set up for utilities, insurance, and promotional materials. I spent the rest of the day on the phone with my bank, explaining the unauthorized use and initiating fraud reports for every charge related to the gallery space. They froze my business credit line immediately and began the process of investigating each transaction. By evening, I'd revoked Chloe's access to everything: the credit cards, the storage unit, the business accounts, and even the shared Netflix password. But as I sat in our apartment looking at the space she'd gradually colonized with her art supplies, easels, and works in progress, I realized the physical dismantling would be just as important as the financial. That night, Chloe texted me from whatever expensive bar she was still celebrating at. "Card got declined when I tried to pay for drinks. Can you check what's wrong?" I read the message 3 times before deleting it without responding. The next morning, while Chloe was still sleeping off whatever expensive celebration she'd managed to fund after her card got declined, I began the digital dismantling with the same methodical precision I'd applied to our finances. First target was the photography portfolio website I'd built for her art documentation work. She'd convinced me that having professional photos of every piece in her collection was essential for insurance purposes and potential sales, so I'd spent weeks creating a sleek, searchable database with high-resolution images of every artwork, complete with provenance information and market analysis. The domain was registered under my business account, hosted on my servers, and maintained through my web development skills that I'd learned to support my photography business. With a few clicks, I changed the domain registration to redirect to a simple under construction page, effectively erasing her entire online art presence. All those carefully cataloged images, the market research I'd helped compile, the professional descriptions she'd written, gone. I downloaded everything to a backup drive first, not out of spite but because I'm not destructive by nature, but her access to the polished online presence that had impressed potential clients was now completely severed. Next came the shared cloud storage where we'd been keeping everything from tax documents to grocery lists. Chloe had gradually filled it with high-resolution images of art pieces, screenshots of auction results, and contact information for gallery owners and collectors. I methodically moved all my personal and business files to a new account, then removed her access to the shared folders. Without the cloud storage, she'd lose immediate access to years of networking contacts and research we'd accumulated together. The timing was crucial because I knew she'd wake up soon and start trying to troubleshoot yesterday's card problems. By 9 a.m., professional movers I'd hired were at our door to remove Chloe's art collection, easels, and the makeshift studio setup that had consumed our living room for the past 6 months. Our 1,200 square foot apartment had gradually transformed into something that looked more like an artist's warehouse than a home. Canvases lined every wall, easels dominated the space where our dining table used to be, and supplies covered every surface. I'd been living around her creative chaos for so long that I'd forgotten what our place actually looked like when it functioned as a living space rather than an art storage facility. The movers were efficient and careful, wrapping each piece according to the detailed inventory I'd compiled from the storage unit files. Chloe woke up around 10 a.m. to find strangers carefully removing a half-finished painting from what used to be our bedroom wall. "What the hell is happening?" she demanded, still wearing the expensive dress from last night's gallery opening. "I'm reclaiming our living space," I said, directing the movers toward a sculpture that had been blocking our kitchen window for 3 months. "These are my pieces. You can't just take my work." "I'm not taking anything. They're going to the storage unit that's now entirely in your name. Everything's properly documented and insured." The confusion on her face was almost satisfying. She'd been so focused on her art world networking that she hadn't noticed the systematic removal of her access to my financial support system. "Storage unit? What are you talking about? And why didn't my card work last night?" "We'll talk about everything once the movers are finished," I said, watching our living room slowly return to something that resembled an actual living room instead of a gallery annex. By noon, the apartment was transformed. I moved my photography equipment back into the main room, set up a proper home office where her chaotic art storage had dominated for months, and reactivated subscriptions to photography magazines and outdoor adventure publications that I'd canceled because Chloe found them aesthetically cluttering. For the first time in months, I could walk from the kitchen to the bedroom without navigating around easels, canvases, and half-completed projects that I'd been funding but had no creative input on. The apartment felt like mine again, like a space designed for living rather than for supporting someone else's artistic ambitions. I even ordered new furniture to replace the pieces we'd sold or stored to make room for Chloe's expanding collection. That evening, Chloe sat in our now spacious living room looking completely disoriented, like she'd woken up in someone else's apartment. "I don't understand what's happening," she said. "Why is everything different? Why are all my pieces gone? And why won't you tell me what's wrong with our accounts?" "Because they're not our accounts anymore," I said. "They're my accounts. And your pieces are exactly where they belong, in storage space that you now control completely." 3 days before Chloe's scheduled return from her West Coast gallery tour, a trip she'd booked using my credit card before I'd frozen it, I made the final move in what had become a carefully orchestrated strategic withdrawal. I booked a solo photography expedition to Iceland, specifically choosing dates that would have me boarding a plane to Reykjavik exactly 4 hours before her flight landed at JFK. The Iceland trip was something I'd wanted to do for 2 years, a chance to photograph the northern lights and document the country's dramatic landscapes during the optimal winter season. Chloe had consistently vetoed the idea every time I'd mentioned it, calling Iceland aesthetically uninspiring and insisting that my photography time would be better spent documenting her art pieces or networking events. Now, with our finances completely separated and my living space reclaimed, I could finally pursue the projects that actually excited me rather than the ones that served her career ambitions. The timing wasn't coincidental. I'd calculated exactly when her flight would arrive, factored in baggage claim and customs delays, and ensured that I'd be somewhere over the Atlantic when she discovered that her old life had been completely dismantled. On Tuesday morning, I sent her a carefully worded email that laid out the new reality with the same precision I'd used to plan everything else. "Chloe, I've made some changes while you've been traveling. Your belongings are now in the Queen's storage unit, which has been transferred entirely to your name. You'll receive the paperwork and new keys by certified mail. All shared credit cards have been canceled due to unauthorized business charges I discovered on my accounts. The apartment locks have been changed, and I've moved your remaining personal items to the storage unit as well. I'm traveling internationally for the next 2 weeks for a photography project. We can discuss logistics when I return, but the financial and living arrangements we had before are permanently ended." I attached photos of the transformed apartment, showing the clean, spacious rooms that had been hidden under months of art storage and creative chaos. I also included a screenshot of my Iceland flight confirmation, making it clear that this wasn't a dramatic gesture but a planned departure that happened to coincide with her return. Throughout her West Coast trip, Chloe had been sending me increasingly demanding messages about covering her hotel upgrades, expensive dinners with gallery contacts, and last-minute flight changes to extend her networking opportunities. Each message had been more entitled than the last, assuming that my credit cards would automatically cover whatever she decided to spend on her career development. "Jake, the hotel wants $200 more per night for a suite upgrade, but the gallery owner I'm meeting prefers to conduct business in upscale environments. Can you call them and authorize the charge? The dinner at Nobu is going to be $400 plus, but this collector is exactly the kind of contact I need. You understand how important this is for my future, right? I found an amazing piece at a gallery in Santa Monica, only $3,200, and the artist is definitely going to blow up. Can you transfer money so I can buy it before someone else does?" I'd ignored every single message, letting them accumulate in my phone like evidence of exactly how she viewed our relationship. Even from 3,000 miles away, she was still treating me like a remote access ATM, assuming that her career goals automatically justified unlimited access to my bank account. Now, sitting in the departure lounge at JFK with my camera equipment and cold weather gear, I watched her messages shift from demanding to confused to increasingly frantic as her flight departure time approached. "Jake, why aren't you responding? My card got declined again and I need to pay for my hotel checkout. Something's wrong with all our accounts. I can't access anything. Call me immediately. I don't understand what's happening. Are you okay? Did something happen to you?" The evolution from entitlement to confusion to panic was exactly what I'd expected, but seeing it play out in real time was more satisfying than I'd anticipated. By the time my boarding announcement came, her messages had reached a level of desperation that confirmed everything I'd realized about our relationship dynamics. She'd never once considered that I might have my own reasons for withdrawing support, only that there must be some technical problem preventing her from accessing resources she'd come to view as automatically available. When Chloe's flight landed at JFK on Thursday evening, I was 2,400 miles away in Reykjavik, reviewing the day's shots of ice caves and thermal springs on my camera's LCD screen. But thanks to our mutual friend Lisa, who worked at the same corporate events company where I occasionally shot headshots, I got a detailed play-by-play of Chloe's catastrophic homecoming that was both more dramatic and more satisfying than I could have orchestrated myself. According to Lisa, who heard it secondhand from another friend who witnessed parts of the airport chaos, Chloe spent nearly 2 hours in the arrivals area waiting for me to pick her up, growing increasingly agitated as her calls went straight to my voicemail. She'd apparently packed 4 large suitcases full of networking outfits and newly acquired art pieces from West Coast galleries, assuming that I'd be there with my SUV to handle the transportation logistics like I always had before. When it became clear that her ride wasn't coming, she had to negotiate with 3 different taxi drivers before finding one willing to transport her and all her luggage to Brooklyn. The fare ended up being over $200 with tolls and tip, money she had to scrape together from various credit cards since her usual payment methods were no longer functional. Lisa said the driver had called his dispatcher twice to confirm the fare because Chloe kept insisting that someone else would pay when they arrived at the destination. The real drama began when Chloe reached our brownstone building and discovered that her keys no longer worked in any of the locks. According to Mrs. Rodriguez, our downstairs neighbor who'd always been friendly with both of us, Chloe spent 20 minutes trying different combinations of keys before sitting down on the front steps and calling everyone in her phone. She was going through her contacts alphabetically, Mrs. Rodriguez told Lisa, calling people and asking if she could stay with them temporarily while she figured out what was happening. But everyone kept saying they were traveling or their places were being renovated or they had family visiting. The rejections were swift and creative. Victoria claimed she was house-sitting in the Hamptons for a collector. Serena said her apartment was being fumigated. Other Gallery World friends cited everything from visiting relatives to sudden business trips to mysterious apartment issues that made hosting impossible. What became clear to everyone watching the scene unfold was that Chloe's social network was much more superficial than she'd believed, built on mutual benefit rather than genuine friendship. When the networking value disappeared, so did the willingness to help. Mrs. Rodriguez said Chloe eventually broke down crying on the front steps, surrounded by her expensive luggage, ranting to anyone who would listen about financial abuse and being abandoned, and how I'd destroyed her life out of jealousy for her success. She tried calling the police to report being locked out of her own apartment, but when they asked for proof of residency, all she could provide was mail forwarded to my address and utilities in my name. The officers suggested she contact a lawyer about tenant rights, but couldn't help her gain immediate access to a property where she had no legal claim. By 11 p.m., she was still on the front steps, now posting increasingly unhinged Instagram stories about toxic masculinity and financial manipulation, tagging me in posts despite knowing I was out of the country. The stories were a mix of selfie videos where she was clearly crying and text posts with phrases like, "When someone shows you who they really are, believe them," and "Never let a man control your finances, ladies." The irony of someone who'd controlled my finances for 8 months posting about financial manipulation wasn't lost on our mutual friends, who began screenshotting her meltdown for posterity. Finally, around midnight, her sister Emma drove 4 hours from Philadelphia to collect her. Emma arrived to find Chloe surrounded by luggage, makeup smeared, designer dress wrinkled, still filming Instagram stories about her victimization. According to Lisa's sources, Emma spent the entire drive back to Philadelphia listening to Chloe alternate between sobbing about losing her life in New York and plotting revenge against me for sabotaging her career at the worst possible moment. But the most telling detail came from Emma herself, who apparently called Lisa directly the next day. She kept asking Emma to lend her money for a hotel so she could stay in the city and fight for her rights, Lisa told me during one of our check-in calls while I was photographing northern lights near Thingvellir National Park. But when Emma asked exactly what rights she thought she had to an apartment she'd never paid rent for, using credit cards she'd never been responsible for, Chloe couldn't actually answer. She just kept saying I was being vindictive and cruel. The final insult came when Chloe realized that her key to the storage unit had been changed as well, meaning she couldn't even access her art collection without going through the proper legal channels to prove her identity and ownership. She'd have to provide documentation to the storage facility, show identification, and potentially wait for new keys to be issued, all while staying on her sister's couch in suburban Philadelphia, 3 hours away from the Manhattan art world she'd been so desperate to impress. While I was capturing the ethereal beauty of Iceland's winter landscapes, Chloe and her art world allies were launching what can only be described as a coordinated social media warfare campaign that backfired so spectacularly it became a case study in how not to control a narrative. The first wave came through Instagram stories, with Chloe posting a series of increasingly dramatic videos from her sister's couch, makeup-free and raw, talking about toxic masculinity in creative relationships and financial manipulation of female artists. Victoria and Serena quickly joined the chorus, sharing cryptic posts about supporting women in the arts and recognizing emotional abuse disguised as generosity. The messaging was clearly coordinated, with all three women using similar language about financial control, artistic suppression, and men who can't handle successful women. They painted a picture of me as a controlling partner who'd sabotaged Chloe's career out of jealousy and insecurity, a man so threatened by her artistic success that I'd resorted to financial warfare to destroy her independence. The problem with their narrative was that I'd already spent 2 weeks before my departure quietly reaching out to our mutual friends with documentation of the actual financial dynamics of our relationship. Not in a vindictive way, but as someone who knew that when the story inevitably came out, I wanted people to have access to facts rather than fiction. I'd shared screenshots of credit card statements showing the $18,000 in art-related expenses, photos of the storage unit filled with pieces I'd funded, and copies of the unauthorized business credit charges for her secret gallery space. Most importantly, I documented the timeline of her demands and my responses, showing a pattern of entitlement that had nothing to do with supporting her art and everything to do with funding a lifestyle she couldn't afford. When Lisa, Tony from my camera club, and several other friends began quietly sharing these receipts in response to the social media campaign, Chloe's narrative started crumbling faster than her financial support system had. The art world friends who'd initially supported her story began distancing themselves as the documentation surfaced, particularly when they realized the scope of the unauthorized credit usage and the secret art resale business she'd been running. But the devastating blow came when I posted my own Instagram story from Iceland, not defensively, but with a level of detailed transparency that left no room for interpretation. Using the skills I developed as a professional photographer to create compelling visual narratives, I crafted a post that told the complete story through images and documentation. Screenshots of the storage unit receipts, showing my name on all payments but her name on all ownership documents. Credit card statements highlighting the art purchases, gallery memberships, and networking expenses. Bank records showing the unauthorized business credit usage for the Williamsburg gallery space I'd known nothing about. Photos of the resale receipts I'd discovered, proving she'd been flipping pieces I'd funded for personal profit. The final image was a screenshot of her text messages over the past few months, showing the progression from casual requests for money to entitled demands to panicked confusion when the funding stopped. I captioned it simply, "When someone shows you who they really are through their financial expectations, believe them." Sometimes supporting someone's dreams means enabling their exploitation of your generosity. Iceland is beautiful, by the way. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Comments poured in from friends, colleagues, and even strangers who'd followed the drama through mutual connections. But more damaging to Chloe's reputation were the comments from people in the art world who recognized her tactics from previous relationships and business dealings. Gallery assistants shared stories about her demanding special treatment without reciprocal value. Other artists talked about her attempts to leverage their work for her own networking advantage. Former colleagues described a pattern of financial dependency disguised as creative collaboration. Victoria and Serena went silent immediately, deleting their supportive posts and apparently blocking Chloe on social media within hours of my documentation going public. Several gallery contacts who'd been considering working with her sent messages distancing themselves from any potential business relationships. The art world, it turned out, was much smaller and more gossipy than Chloe had realized, and reputation mattered more than she'd calculated. The most satisfying vindication came from unexpected sources. Women in the art community who thanked me for exposing behavior that gave female artists a bad reputation. "This isn't about supporting women in the arts," one gallery owner commented publicly. "This is about accountability for financial manipulation, regardless of gender. Real female artists don't build careers by exploiting their partners' bank accounts." Within 48 hours, Chloe's social media presence had transformed from victim narrative to cautionary tale. Her follower count dropped significantly, her engagement disappeared, and the art world contacts she'd worked so hard to cultivate began actively avoiding association with her name. The attempted character assassination had backfired completely, instead revealing her own character in ways that would haunt her professional aspirations for years to come. 6 months later, I was editing photos in my new home studio when Lisa called with an update that felt like the final chapter of a story I'd moved beyond but still found satisfying to hear concluded. The transformation of my life had been remarkable in ways I hadn't fully anticipated when I'd first frozen Chloe's credit cards and booked that Iceland trip. Using the money I'd reclaimed from her art world expenses, I'd rented a proper photography studio in a converted warehouse in Long Island City, complete with professional lighting equipment, backdrop systems, and editing stations that let me take on higher-paying commercial projects. The $3,800 monthly I'd been spending on Chloe's lifestyle had translated into serious business investments. New camera equipment, a drone for aerial photography, editing software subscriptions, and marketing materials that had already doubled my client base. I'd also finally booked the travel documentary projects I'd been putting off for years, using my reclaimed financial freedom to photograph conservation efforts in Costa Rica, document renewable energy projects in Denmark, and capture the daily life of remote communities in northern Canada. Each trip reinforced how much of my own creative vision I'd sacrificed while funding someone else's artistic aspirations. But the personal transformation was equally significant. Without the constant financial drain and emotional exhaustion of supporting someone who viewed me as a resource rather than a partner, I'd rediscovered interests and friendships that had withered during my relationship with Chloe. I'd rejoined my photography club, started rock climbing again, and was developing genuine relationships with fellow artists who valued collaboration over exploitation. "So here's the update," Lisa said, clearly enjoying the gossip potential of what she was about to share. Chloe moved back in with her parents in New Jersey after Emma got tired of supporting her indefinitely. She tried to restart her art dealing career from her childhood bedroom, but her reputation in Manhattan was completely destroyed after your documentation went viral. The downward spiral had been swift and comprehensive. Without access to my funding, Chloe couldn't maintain her gallery memberships, attend networking events, or acquire new pieces for her collection. The storage unit with all her art became a monthly expense she couldn't afford, forcing her to liquidate pieces at well below their purchase price just to cover the ongoing costs. "But here's the really satisfying part," Lisa continued. She tried to rebrand herself as a lifestyle curator and started approaching clients in New Jersey, but several people recognized her from the social media drama and warned others about her financial tactics. She got exposed trying to run the same scheme on a wealthy divorcee in Princeton who'd hired her to redecorate his house. The lifestyle curator venture had lasted exactly 6 weeks before her new client discovered she'd been marking up vendor prices by 300% and keeping the difference, plus attempting to use his credit for personal purchases disguised as design expenses. When he posted his own warning about her tactics on local social media groups, her business collapsed before it could properly launch. "She's working part-time at an art supply store now," Lisa reported with obvious satisfaction. "Minimum wage plus commission. Her parents are apparently putting pressure on her to get a real job and stop chasing artistic careers that depend on other people's money." The irony wasn't lost on me. Chloe had spent 8 months treating me like I was small-minded and unambitious while pursuing dreams that required constant external funding. Now she was discovering what it actually meant to support yourself while pursuing creative goals, something I'd been doing successfully for years before she'd entered my life. Meanwhile, I'd found something I hadn't expected when I'd started dismantling our financial entanglement, peace with my own artistic vision and financial independence. The pressure to justify my creative choices to someone who viewed my work as less sophisticated than her art world connections was gone. I could photograph what excited me, invest in equipment that served my vision, and build a career based on my own merit rather than someone else's networking strategies. I'd also started seeing someone new, Emma, not Chloe's sister, but a documentary filmmaker I'd met at a photography exhibition. She was everything Chloe wasn't: financially independent, genuinely supportive of my work, and interested in building something together rather than extracting resources for her own projects. When she saw my Iceland photos, her first response was excitement about my artistic vision, not questions about how much the trip had cost or complaints that I hadn't taken her along. "You know what the best part is?" I told Lisa as I looked around my studio, filled with equipment I'd bought with money that used to fund someone else's ambitions. "I'm not even angry anymore. Chloe taught me exactly what I don't want in a relationship, and cutting her off led me to everything I do want. In a weird way, I should probably thank her." The conversation ended with Lisa promising to keep me updated on any further developments in Chloe's ongoing efforts to rebuild her life. But honestly, I was losing interest in her story. I had my own narrative to write now, one where I was both the protagonist and the beneficiary of my own hard work and financial discipline. That evening, Emma came by the studio to see my latest prints from a series documenting urban beekeeping initiatives. As she studied the images with genuine enthusiasm and offered thoughtful feedback about composition and storytelling, I realized how fundamentally different this felt from my previous relationship. Here was someone who appreciated my work for its artistic merit, supported my financial independence, and contributed her own creative energy to our partnership instead of draining mine for her own purposes. 6 months ago, I'd been funding someone else's dreams while neglecting my own. Now I was living exactly the life I'd always wanted, with someone who enhanced rather than exploited my ambitions.